stuff out of the sock drawer, you know, it's like,
No, I haven't.
You can tell it's fall, all these people that don't. Yes.
Shall we?
sure.
Yeah, sit around in.
Yeah, you did.
All right, I'll sit down,
Jody?
and then I'll get up and. Huh?
Did we get it? Oh, you mean for the pledge?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I'd like to call the meeting of the Great Falls International Airport Authority to order, please. And we'll start with a roll call of the board members present. Commissioner Rooney,
Here.
Commissioner Hoban,
Present.
Commissioner Gutza. Here. Commissioner Swenson,
Here.
Commissioner Kantorowicz,
Here.
Commissioner Evans is here, and Commissioner Talcott is not, though he is expected to join us. So, with a quorum of the board present, I call the meeting officially to order. Would you please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have before us a consent agenda and a consent agenda B. I think for ease of working through the consent agenda, and because we do not have Commissioner Talcott present that necessitated the agenda B, I will ask to put all of the consent agenda items together. The consent agenda is made up of routine day-to-day items that require board action but do not appear to have a significant public impact. Items may be pulled from the consent agenda for separate discussion or vote by any board member. The consent agenda then would include the approval of the board meeting minutes from August 26, 2014, payroll checks totaling $103,087.33, maintenance and operations checks in the range of check number 20766 to 20825, range 20827 to 20838, and check number 20840 totaling $385,576.89. Separate maintenance and operations checks to Talcott Construction numbering number 20826 and 20839 totaling $240,238.95. Approval of passenger facility charges, which happens to total 0, and financial reports for August. Is there anyone who wishes to have something removed from the consent agenda? If not, do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda as approved and described?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda as presented and described. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Consent agenda is passed. We'll move directly into the director's report.
Yes, and have a, thank you everybody for coming today. We've got a lot of exciting things to talk about. I draw your attention on the financial reports to the auto rentals for the month of August. August was our second busiest month on record, July being the busiest month on record, and obviously those are the first 2 months of the fiscal year. But you can see in August, we're up over 20% on the auto rentals for the month. And I think that's a particularly important number because it shows how much inbound tourism we attracted this summer. That's one of the early indicators we get because our activity data isn't available from the FAA until about 6 months after the fact. And so we'll begin seeing where activity came from for the summer sometime near the first of the year. So this is one of the first leading indicators we get. About a month from now, we'll start looking at our marketing numbers. We'll meet with Went and talk to them about how many hits our ads got, how often they were opened. That type of thing will be the next indicator we get. And then we'll also be meeting with the hotels to talk about their summer. But this is one of the first numbers where we get to kind of see how summer went, and we're pretty excited about how much we were up. Just a great tourism summer, it looks like, based on this level of activity. Parking's also up for the summer. This is one of our strongest 2 months of parking that we've ever had too. But I did want to just make special note of that because it was a very sizable increase on the auto rentals. In addition to that, I was going to mention that I did attend a DC trip with the Montana Defense Alliance 2 weeks ago, and we went out there to talk primarily about Red Horse and some of the proposed drawdowns on the Red Horse Squadron to get a better understanding of what's going on there, and if there's anything that can be done to try to prevent that or improve upon the scenario. One of the items being that the Red Horse Squadron that's attached to our National Guard unit uses a lot of the equipment from the Red Horse Squadron at Malmstrom, and so if there's a possibility of an interagency transfer, we'd like to keep some of that equipment here locally so that our Red Horse Squadron here would have the access to that type of equipment. We met with the delegation and we talked quite a bit about these same issues on the Red Horse Squadron. The other thing, which is a little more pertinent directly to the airport, is we met with U.S. Customs. We met with both the Customs side and the Border Patrol side, specifically the Air Wing, to talk about some of the drawdowns over here at our Air Wing station. About 3 or 4 years ago, we were up around the mid-30s staffing level with 5 pretty capable airplanes, and over the last couple of years, there's been drawdowns as the focus is really headed to the southern border, to where today we've got about a dozen people and primarily 3 less capable airplanes. We've got 2 A-Stars and a Cessna single engine. And so in terms of the ability of that group over there to pursue an airplane into our airspace that might have come across without any flight plan, there's really not a pursuit capability over there. And even the detection capability has been degraded, not to mention the interdiction capability with fewer people. If there is an airplane that's come across, or even someone that drives across, the ability to intercept that group and deal with them has been degraded. And of course, we've all seen, over the last few weeks, a terrorism threat. More and more, we're seeing westernized people being implicated as involved with these groups in the Middle East. And our concern is many of these westernized folks can free flow through Canada pretty easily. I think even the Border Patrol would acknowledge the Canadian ability to detect threats and deal with threats is much less than ours. And so, given our proximity to the northern border, the assets are right here in Great Falls with a military base, the dam infrastructure, other targets of interest. We went to Customs and told them we'd like to work with them to try and move this up the pecking order of funding needs in the system and use our delegation to do that. And so we've opened a really good dialogue with them. I think they see where we could be helpful by bringing shedding some light on these situations and the need for more assets up on the northern border. So I think it was a really important discussion that we've opened up with them, and I'm hoping that we can continue to work on that specific issue. So I think it was a really worthwhile trip from that perspective. We also had a visit yesterday from our property representative from Delta Airlines out of Atlanta. She is the head of what we call the Airline Affairs Committee, which is just basically the airlines that sign our airline agreement. They appoint one airline to deal directly with us on lease negotiations, and that is Delta. So we had a good meeting yesterday where we kind of put some of the cards on the table about what the airlines would like to have, what the airport would like to have, duration, length of term, that type of thing. And ideally, I think we'll be able to kind of come together on an agreement. Our airline agreement expires at the end of June, so we want to have something in place prior to that. I don't think there's a great distance between us. The airlines would like, they're generally the things the airlines would like to have are a cap on our growth of our airline rates. They would like to have a length of term that gives them a little security out there, probably 5 or 6 years if they could get that cap on rates. They would also like to have more control over our capital project spending, more say over our projects and those types of things. Right now, I think we have a pretty good balance, and we have a really good record of low costs. So, our opinion is that those things don't need to change. We've been very responsible with our costs, and are one of the lower cost airports in their system. And so, our viewpoint is things can largely stay as they are. We'd like to see them stay as they are. I think we're willing to accept agreement terms anywhere from 3 years up to maybe a 6-year agreement. And the only thing we would like to have is greater control over how we credit some of our revenues that are non-airline related. Because over the next 5 or 6 years, we really need to start to begin to think about the next phase of FedEx's presence here at the airport. 8 years from now, the FedEx facility will be debt-free, and their lease expires at that same time. And so we need to think about how we transition that relationship into the next phase. Would we consider selling them the assets, or are we going to lease them the building directly and have that be a profit center for us? And we want to have landing fees that are predictable and stable through that period to ensure that their interest in staying in Great Falls stays in Great Falls. And they do have other facilities for mail in Billings, and so there are some other potential suitors for that facility. And so we really feel that the relationship we have right now with the airlines, the costs are low. We'd like to maintain a landing fee that's fairly low to keep FedEx's interest in the facility. And then the terminal rate, we think, is less of a priority. We're a very inexpensive terminal, about $20 a square foot right now. And so we'd like to see more of the revenue shared from our parking and our concessions to keep the landing fee lower rather than the terminal rent going forward. And so that's the one primary change that we talked about yesterday. So we'll keep you updated on those discussions. Hopefully we'll kind of have an agreement by the end of the year as to what we want to advance. We might have a call or two with some of the other airlines to continue those discussions. And hopefully around January, February, we'd have paperwork mailed out for an extension going forward. So I think we're progressing right on line with where we need to be in that agreement going forward. And the primary function of that agreement is it sets our primary rate setting with the airlines. It tells how we'll calculate our rates. It also has a guarantee in there that if the airlines leave for any reason, Great Falls, they would have to pay their terminal rent through the end of the term typically. So that's our primary security to know that that we've got some revenue there that would stay there throughout the remainder of the term. So that's the primary business deal between us and the airlines. The other thing I was going to mention is we did receive a grant for the next phase of our noise program. That includes the construction of the 20 homes that we designed with the grant we received at the end of last calendar year. And so those homes are being completed now in terms of design. They'll be ready for construction next year. And now we've received the funding for that construction. It also includes funding for another 20 homes of design. As I said in the weekly report, we won't do any of that design until after the Part 150 is complete so that we know specifically what homes are in and out of contour. The FAA has caveated the grant as such, which is good because we wouldn't do it anyway. But once we complete the Part 150, we will have the funding for the next 20 homes to be designed. And we'll obviously have an opportunity at that point to talk to the board about continuing the program on. But we did receive the grant. The board approved signing the grant a couple of months ago, and so we have executed the grant. But it did come in since the last meeting. And then the other thing I was going to mention, and you probably saw it in the paper, the Tribune called, I guess it was on Friday, and indicated they want to do a wildlife story. They had indicated there was a national story about a deer strike at an airport, which, just talking to Dwight before the meeting, it sounds like that may have happened some time ago, so I'm not sure why they did the story now, but they did highlight kind of our wildlife program. For those of you that weren't involved when the last time we re-upped that program, more or less what we do is we have a permit in place to go out and take animals off the airfield. We try to get rid of some of the ground animals like the prairie dogs and the other prey animals to keep the raptors away. We haze geese, we shoot some geese. We do those activities to keep primarily the birds away from the airfield. Obviously badgers and things like that create other problems because of the digging and under the fence and that type of thing. So we do some removal of those types of animals. But we have a fairly active wildlife program. Currently, the Air National Guard has a biologist that is working on the airfield daily to protect their interests in the airfield. They have a grant right now, and so they funded a full-time biologist position. So currently we have an extra resource we can rely on in cases where we're not sure what animal to remove, or we want to ask about some techniques. We can use that resource. We had a biologist through a grant that was here for about a year and a half.
A year, yeah.
Was it a year? About 3 years ago, and that grant ran its course. So now we don't have one, but we do have a check-in every year with USDA, and they're aware of our permit status, and we have to receive permits through them in the state to do the activities we do. But we do have an active wildlife program, and something we work on every day out there to make sure we don't have a wildlife problem. So the story was oriented at another airport, and they were just looking for a local interest component to that. It wasn't specifically that we had a strike or anything recently. It was more of a general interest story.
Was biologist pretty helpful? Is it different than you carrying your shotgun in the back of your...
Yeah, he's pretty helpful just because he spends his whole day out there. And then comes up at night on occasion and stuff, so it benefits us a lot and funded by the Guard. So.
And sometimes those folks have different techniques that they use and different theories that they apply. So it's always interesting to hear different inputs to that. I mean, some airports are using falconry to get rid of birds. To get rid of some of the predatory birds, they actually use falconry. At Port of Seattle, when I was there, SeaTac, the biologist really believed in maintaining a stable population of coyotes, which he had specific coyotes he left around because they were pretty elusive coyotes, didn't like to be out on the surfaces, but they kept all the ground animals down. And so, I think it's always good to have different folks around that have different theories of how that ecosystem's working and what's good and bad for it, and what you should be doing to try and keep birds away and attractants for birds away. Because I think all of us would probably agree that birds are probably the worst of the animals, unless you've got elk or something that are that are deer on the airfield, which with our fence we typically don't have a problem with that. The birds are probably the biggest concern you've got out there.
There's a picture of you, Rod.
And that's all I have on the director's report. I'll shift over to the capital project report. Next to your agendas, you've got these two sheets. We haven't done this in a couple months because we haven't had any activity, but we are trying to wrap up the terminal program. And so on the sheet with the yellow coloring, in October, we're anticipating we went ahead and put these in there because we're kind of firming up on the prices. And later on in the agenda, we've got the aviation history display, and so we kind of wanted to give you an idea how much money is left in that surplus fund, or that, I should say that soft cost fund. So in October, we're anticipating spending about $21,000 to complete the image boards. Part of that's printing, and part of that is acquisition of images. Those are both estimated, but we have some estimates now from the folks that are doing that work for us. So about $21,000 we expect to spend on that. That'll leave us $43,000 in the soft cost fund. We still want to do some lighting in the exit lane. Our temporary lighting that we've put up right now is improving the functioning of the exit sentry alarm, which is what keeps people from walking backwards up the exit. What's happening with that giant skylight up there is we're getting some clouds moving through the field where the sun comes through. And those sensors are able to see the shadow of that cloud come across the wall, and it thinks it's somebody trying to sneak back through the alarm. And so those shadows are causing some alarms, and what we've identified is if we go up above that alarm system and we shine some light directly down so we can maintain a bright area in there without shadows coming through it, we think we can eliminate those ghost alarms. And so we have some work lighting up there now. If you go through, there's a bunch of work lights strung above that area, and it's working really effectively. It's been in place now for about a month, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And so we've got a lot less ghost alarms. So we do want to buy some lighting to put in there to try and improve the functioning of that. So we haven't got a proposal yet, but I think that's probably going to be in the neighborhood of $10,000, maybe $15,000 to get some good lighting in that area at the most. And so we should have plenty of money left over to do that aviation history display out of this budget. And I think that'll pretty much conclude what's yet to be done out of the soft cost budget. Looking at the snow removal building, which is the second sheet, we had quite a bit of activity in September as construction completed and our crews began taking over the fit and finish of the building to get the work done to inhabit the building. We did get the floor epoxy coated. The entire shop area now has been treated. In addition to that, our tool room and the utility rooms inside the office part of the building we had treated. That was about $29,000. The office equipment, we bought a printer to go in there. We're getting cabinetry in the kitchen. We put in a modular work unit for all the guys that go over there, that will be working out of there. And bought the remainder of the office chairs and that type of thing for them. That's costing about $13,000. The tool room build out, which includes some shelving. We're going to heat the tool room. Originally there was going to be a generator in there that would have provided most of the heat, but we don't have, we decided not to put a generator in that room, so it's going to be a tool room for some period of time. So we're going to put in basically a gas heater up above. Prep for the installation of our welder, vehicle lift, and other equipment. That's costing about $7,500. Fuel system access control. We want to have a robust fuel system over there that we can track the user of the fuel, and then we also want to be able to put in the mileage of the vehicle so we can begin to track our usage by vehicle. Currently, we don't have any fleet maintenance techniques so that we know how much gas those units are using. And for budgetary purposes and just tracking going forward, we want to have a better understanding of that so we can find problems with the equipment, know what our true operating costs of these different pieces of equipment are. So that's an electronic system that includes a pin pad, and then you also put in the mileage of the vehicle, and that's about $11,600 to get that system in. We're going to put a vestibule out front as a windbreak, about $7,000. And then we're going to take piped air throughout the building to down the supports in the building throughout so that we can access that piped air at each of the bays where the vehicles are, and that's about $5,000. So it brings our total on the soft cost spending at about $93,000. We have about $21,000 left in that budget. The only item that's left in there that we're still looking at is we had the building ready for a bridge crane, and Rod's looking at the acquisition of that bridge crane now. We put a few of these things that we wanted in the building. We left them as a soft cost budget and pulled them out of the project cost because we couldn't afford the project cost of it. But if we can do it through the soft cost budget, then we figured we'd add those back in. So the last piece of it is the bridge crane. The building's ready for it. We just need the crane itself. So Rob's looking at that now, and we should be able to get an update on that next month. And then I think we're pretty much done with that project too.
What's the digging out front?
What's that?
The digging?
Oh, that's where they're putting in the vestibule. The guys,
Dig that far out?
well, they're putting a concrete pad. They're enlarging the concrete pad there to hold the vestibule. So our guys are actually doing that. They took over our little excavator and poured a foundation in there with the supports, and then the vestibule actually just bolt in front of the building to break that wind a little bit on that wind side.
My God, you didn't take out that handicap parking, did you?
No, the gravel handicap stall is still in place. Every morning the guys go out and make sure they rearrange the rocks so that it's still painted correctly. You gotta check your tires before you leave in case you picked up a blue one.
Yeah, back off the blue rocks.
And that's all I've got on the director's report, unless anyone has any questions on that stuff.
Any questions on either the director's report or the capital funding plan as presented? No? Okay. The first item for action this month is the AvMax contract upper shop.
Per our discussion last month, we've been working, now that we're getting ready to vacate that upper shop, we had listed it out on LoopNet and entertained a couple calls on that. But in addition to that, as we said last month, it would be a really functional building for AvMax. And we did go out and offer to AvMax the deal we had proposed last month, which is number 2 in this memo, which is a kind of a lease-to-own type of arrangement where they would pay us a monthly rental fee, which would reduce the principal balance, and eventually they would own that facility. The facility was appraised about $250,000. So the monthly payment that we worked out with them comes out to about $2,700 plus the $500 per year, or $2,700 per month plus $500 per year in ground rent. And then what will end up happening is we want to lease back from them the sand bay. It's a separate bay in the middle of the building that we'd like to still use for about $200 a month. So the dot point down there, as it says, they would pay us about $2,300 per month, and over the course of 15 years, they would eventually own that building. If at any point they stopped paying, they would lose all interest in the building and it would revert back to us. So it truly is a lease-to-own type of arrangement. We've discussed this with AvMax. We have an indication from the CEO that he would like to accept that offer and they would like to use that facility. The good news for us is that would kind of unite the ownership of, or at least the usage of buildings in that area. We won't have one odd tenant stuffed between 2 or 3 buildings of a different tenant. It'll be all AvMax in that area. This building is very close to the wood hangar that they use, and it's immediately adjacent to their office building. They hope to use this building to tear down engines. Their plan is eventually to be able to tear down jet engines and send the parts back for refurbishment. And then they'll reassemble those. So it'll require them to get some additional certifications for power plants. But it's a step towards eventually having power plant maintenance here, which is a pretty desirable situation if we could get that. Then it's hard to find a place that can work on jet engines. So I think this is a positive step for everybody, both in them having the building, us being able to lease the building, and then finally having an ownership stake eventually in the airport. Right now everything they have is leased. And they have told us in the future they would like to eventually own some of the buildings they're in. So this is a step in the right direction, and we would recommend to the board that we extend this last and best offer to AvMax to lease in that facility for $2,300 per month for 15 years. And then after that 15-year period, they would pay a ground rent as opposed to paying a building rent because they would actually own the building itself.
Questions or comments?
Do you say they actually accepted that?
They did. They've indicated they will accept it. Now, I know, we've gone, down approvals in the past with AvMax, and when it comes to signing the lease, that, sometimes that hasn't happened. But I'm fairly comfortable this time. It seems like the yes is coming directly from John Binder. And typically, if he's in agreement with things, it'll get done. And AvMax has indicated to us they'd like to be into this building by November. So I have a pretty good feeling that this is this actually going to move forward, which I think is great for everybody.
Commissioner Holden?
Well, what about maintenance?
They'll have all maintenance responsibility. It'll be a triple net, just as if they own the building now, and we're the financing mechanism. And just like a bank loan, if you stop paying, the bank will repo. The only difference is this time, we're the financing agent, so we just get our own building back.
I move. We accept that lease agreement with AvMax for the upper shop.
Is there a second?
Second motion.
It's been moved and seconded that the AvMax lease be, I guess it's already been accepted, but goes forward as presented. Is there any additional question or discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Great, thank you.
I didn't even know if you're doing good. I can tell you're doing great.
Okay. Looks like Commissioner Talcott is going to take it easy today, so I'll move on to number 2, the MDT road easement.
As we said last month, a number of years ago in 1985, MDOT, who was the original constructor of both the interstate and at the same time the airport access road, struck an easement with the city of Great Falls, who at the time was the operator of the airport, to do a major reconstruction on the airport entry road. And so there was a fairly good project done at that point 20 years ago, a little more than 20, 30 years ago. And the project, or the roadway is about in the condition where it needs to be milled and overlaid again. We need to clean up some of the access issues out there as you go past that water tower. That's the MDOT area all the way out to the interstate. And if you look at the drawing here, which is represented in red, you can see that the entrances to several core tenants are in that area. The tower access today is right next to the airplane petting zoo there. The access to the guard is off of that red section. The access for almost all of the terminal employees is off of that same section. And so we have a lot of movements trying to make that left into those facilities. And then conversely, we have a lot of people trying to exit out into that red area with no merge lanes today. And so we have a bit of a safety concern. We also have a proliferation of driveways through there that I think if folks would have looked at them at the same time, they would have tried to reduce some of those movements into a few less intersections in that area. There's a lot of lefts and rights when there's a dominant flow of traffic coming out of the airport and then out of the FedEx facility, depending on the time of day, to have those crossing movements in there. And so what we're proposing with this easement is that it looks like the structure the city would like now is the city would vacate their easement with MDOT, and then we would have our own easement. MDOT had initially proposed that it would be a tri-party easement somehow, that if the airport authority was ever sucked back into the city would resume responsibility, or if the airport were ever gone, somehow the city would have responsibility. The city obviously, I don't think, wants that, the latest we've been told. And so I think the easement now will just be between us and MDOT, which I think is fine. And then any successor that would run the airport, if the authority ever went away, would have that responsibility. With this easement, we accept responsibility for that piece of the roadway, the maintenance of it. We're already doing the snow plowing, so it's nothing different than we're doing right now. But we would have to continue to upkeep that road, paint that road, mill and overlay it when it needs it. But in exchange for that, we get control of our only entrance point into the airport, which I think is important for us, not only from an aesthetic point of view, because we want to mill and overlay that whole section down to the terminal next year, but also to control some of these access points that are important to our tenants, and be able to expand those and improve upon some of the safety aspects that we have, safety deficiencies that we have out there today. And so what we're proposing to the board is that we would execute an easement for $0 with the MDOT folks, and we would gain responsibility for that piece of the road. The reason the timing is critical is we need to begin designing this road. We actually have the grant already to begin designing this road, and we need to get that underway, but we can't use FAA dollars unless we control the underlying land. The easement will suffice for that control, so we need to get the easement done now so we can begin design in order to construct it next summer.
So John, otherwise everything is as discussed at the last work
Yeah,
session?
nothing's changed except for the city doesn't want to be party to the easement.
Right.
At least that's what they've said most recently.
Okay. Comments, questions?
So this is, not that the MDOT has put a lot of money into this road of theirs, but going forward, these funds are funds to maintain this road would be available through the FAA.
So there's not additional money that's available. We will have to commit our own dollars to doing this, but it's a fairly small piece of roadway. And so by getting the easement, it becomes eligible for the use of our AIP funding and our PFC funding. So it's not there's no funds that track along with it, but we are able to use our existing funding sources to do it. And and frankly, I think we all agree there's really no other benefactor of that piece of the road other than the airport and its tenants. So I think if you look at it from a sort of a taxation perspective, we're probably the party that should bear the responsibility for that piece of road. In addition, their timing of funding ability, it's a very low priority on the MDOT system. It doesn't match our need to have a decent road that serves us and our tenants. And so I think having responsibility for it is in our best interest as an authority to control what happens there and when, so that we can blend it into our other pieces of roadway system and have a similar aesthetic and function as the rest of our airport.
It would be necessary for us to control the access points. If we have the road, we can control the access points. If some other entity has it, then they're going to control it.
And that's a key point. We would like to figure out how to combine the left into the guard with a left for the tower employees and the terminal employees to eliminate one of those lefts across the entry road and then one of the right outs. And that's what we're working on with the guard right now is to try and find a way to redesign that area so that we can reduce one of those intersections. Because if you remember, one thing we're doing is we're taking this intersection you see here where the airplanes are, that's labeled Airport Avenue A. The portion of that up until it reaches Airport Avenue, 2nd Avenue, will be one way leading out of the airport. That will be our primary exit from the terminal building. So if everything stands as it is today, MDOT would control the intersection where all of the airport traffic is coming out of that's exiting the terminal portion of the building. So if you're not parking and you're just driving through and picking somebody up, or you're picking up a rental car, that flow would flow out onto an MDOT piece of road that we don't control the intersection of. And so we really want to incorporate that lot where you see the paved parking area into our parking lot by moving the road around that parking lot. That's the reason we're doing that. And it requires us to get control of that intersection and make some improvements next year.
Just be nice if money came with that.
It would be.
When would it actually be transferred, the easement actually be transferred to us?
Ideally, in the next couple of weeks. I just, before I came to this meeting, I emailed MDOT and said, this needs to happen chop chop, because we've really got to start spending design dollars, and I can't do it unless I control the land. Because I'm spending money on airport property, and if it's not airport property, I can't spend money when I sign that grant. So I've got to get the property first before I can start design.
It puts us where we're acknowledging a safety concern, assuming the responsibility, and unable to fix it for another 6 months. But I assume we're all insured and everything for that.
Absolutely. I mean, we have our liability insurance, and we're trying to improve the safety circumstance today. JC probably remembers a number of times people have come to the authority and said this intersection without the merge, when you come out of the airport, there is unsafe, and there are some safety concerns there, and that's one of the reasons we want to create that merge lane. The entire length of the road all the way down to the golf building is to provide all those right-hand turnouts time to get up to the speed necessary to merge. Because today, clearly, we don't have that. And particularly in the summertime, when we have a lot of rental car people that aren't familiar with the traffic here, they just come bombing right out onto that road in front of everybody that's coming out of there. It seems to be less, and they slide through it in the winter, too. I mean, it's not just summertime, but we do need to improve it.
Any other comments or questions? Looking for a motion?
I move we accept the proposal with the MDOT to acquire the plans. What do you call it? The lease amendment? Oh, excuse me.
Easement. The easement.
Easement, yeah.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
It's been moved and seconded that we acquire the easement from MDOT for the entry and exit roads. Any other discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passed. Passes. And I think we need this diagram for our next item as well.
That's right, we're recycling the same diagram.
The FAA Tower Amendment.
Referring to the next step, item number 3, the blue line at the top of the map is the area that we're discussing. After 9/11, the FAA moved to improve security around the tower cabs. And one of the things they did in Great Falls was they acquired this piece of road that used to run between Mang and the FAA tower, and they basically just fenced it off. And so the road still exists, and actually I think even has curb and gutter. The road itself is not in great shape because nothing's been done to it. But we would like to remove that from the FAA lease and open a road back in that area, maybe not even improving the road. We might see what minimal mill and overlay we could do in that area to spruce it up a little bit for employees only. And that road, if you look at the drawing, as I said, there at the where the airplanes are on Airport Avenue A, the section up to Airport 2nd Street will be one way leading out of the airport. That'll be the primary exit for the terminal traffic. What we want to do is try and create a road that would be a left-hand turn in the proximity of the Mang gate for employees so that they could turn left at that same point where the Mang folks are turning and then sneak back behind those airplanes and access Airport Avenue A beyond that intersection with Airport 2nd Avenue. Then they would go along Airport Avenue A until they reach that blue strip. And then at that blue strip, they would turn back into past the tower and back into the terminal complex. And so the air traffic controllers would use that to get in. All the terminal employees would use that to get in. And then the car wash, which is located right next to the ATC, would use that to get their cars back and forth from the terminal building. Otherwise, all those employees are going to have to go all the way around the terminal loop and come through as a passenger would to the front of the terminal to access those functions. That eliminates capacity and increases the amount of maintenance we'd have to do on that roadway. And in addition, the rental car, what we call jockeys, or the folks that move the cars around, tend to do that quickly, even though we stay on top of them with enforcement. We just don't like to mix them with pedestrians if we don't have to, because they're on a mission and they're not always paying a ton of attention. And so we want to take this out of the FAA lease and create that passageway back to the back of the terminal. In the process of doing this, the FAA lease actually expires about a year from now. And so since we're amending the lease, they would like to negotiate an extension to the FAA tower lease. I think everyone agrees we want the tower to stay there. We want the FAA to continue to be in control of that tower. And so we would also propose we negotiate an extension with them for 10 years with that amendment. On top of that, they've come to us and said they would like some improvements to their leasehold. They have a gravel lot at the back of their compound there that they'd like to pave, and they also have some pretty dark spots, particularly around this road that they're reopening. And they would like to have some lighting on the back of their building so they could see those areas better from the tower. And so we've told them, we would be willing to do that. Rod has gotten a quote from our engineer. They think that those improvements are about $86,000. And so what we're proposing in this amortization schedule you see attached to the memo is that we would finance those into the lease at a 5% rental rate and just add it to the rental rate for the next 10 years. So we would be basically the financing mechanism for them. It doubles their rent. So I think as they take a minute to digest this, it'll be interesting to see if they proceed with it or not. I've kind of said to Laura, I think she's of the same opinion. I don't think we care. If they want the improvements done, I think, at a 5% rent, or 5% rate, that's better than anything we're probably going to earn in that period. And so I think it's kind of if they would like it done, we're happy to build it in. If they look at the cost and say it's too high, we're happy to take it out. I don't think it's a primary business mover for this deal. I think we're primarily just trying to get what they need out of it without them having to go out and do a project, take advantage of our asphalt costs since we've got a bigger asphalt project than they would have and a bigger electrical project than they would have, so they'll get some cost savings. I think it's just fortuitous for both of us if we can do this in the lease. So we would propose to the board that we take back that piece of roadway, we do the improvements should the FAA elect to move forward with them, charge them those improvements over 5%, and then extend the lease for another 10 years to get that longer-term security for them for the tower cab.
Okay, everybody followed that? Three parts?
The one thing I said 10 years, I think we should finance the improvements over 10 years. They've actually even mentioned they might be interested in a 20-year lease. Should the FAA be interested in the 20-year lease, I think, I would like to have the latitude to work with them on that to see what that would look like. The improvements would remain over 10 years. I don't think we want to go any further with that.
So then just making sure we understand this, the 3 points would be as stated, except that you'd have the latitude on the second point to go up to 20 years instead of just another 10 years. Should that be the posture of the FAA? Is that
Yeah.
correct? Okay. Tracy?
If we went with a 20-year lease, is that going to be an inducement for them to keep it an FAA tower instead of going privatized?
I would hope so. I mean, that's one of the reasons I'm interested in doing the longer lease. I think if they have a longer term horizon and they've got that real estate nailed down for 20 years, and we can all say it's a FAA asset for that period of time, I would hope that would be one of the positives that we could point out and continue to have FAA tower there. There's a lot of places they have to move their tower, and that's amazingly costly for them when they have to do that.
I went over there and looked this all over, and this all makes sense. And that roadway looks fine. It doesn't really look like it needs any maintenance at all. Just take the fence out and move it over between the edge of the road and the tower. It'll help the traffic pattern, make everything flow more smoothly into the employee parking lot and across to the rental cars.
So John, what would be the case if they don't want to do that?
If they don't want to do the improvements,
Right.
we would just take that out of the rent, and they would continue to pay their ground rent.
Okay, but still extending the lease.
Yeah, I think we should still, work with them on up to a 20-year term. And ideally, if they want to get these improvements done, I don't think we really want to push that beyond 10 years because, lighting and some paving, 20-year life's pretty long, for us to have our money out there.
John, there is a couple of those monitoring wells from but in that agreement, those would be removed when the remediation's done at the guard, and then they're put back to...
Rod's right. I think there's one or two of those.
There's 3, I think.
Is there 3 that are actually in this roadway pavement? But they don't access those more than a couple times a year, do they?
No, it's...
And so I think they can probably stay in place, and then
Yeah.
once the remediation's done, those can
And
be
they
pulled out.
repair all that, yeah.
And then, at some point in the future, when we do a mill and overlay, we could always, get that area back to a flat level surface.
Okay, are we ready for a motion then? It would be to amend the tower lease to remove the roadway corridor, amend the tower lease to extend the term for 10 additional years or up to 20 years, and amend the tower lease to include the recovery of the improvements at a 5% cost of capital. Is there a motion?
I so move.
Second?
I'll second.
Any other discussion? Call for the question then. All those in favor of the motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Next item is private hangar assignment.
Laura, could you speak towards that one?
Sure, same thing, nothing has changed from last month. This is just, it was Harvey Hampton's private hangar that he has sold to Roger White, and this will move the agreement between Harvey and the airport authority to Roger White instead. And we would recommend going forward with it.
Seems pretty straightforward, no changes since last month, or the last work session. Do we have a motion?
I move that we agree to the assignment of lease.
Second it.
Okay, any questions or discussion? It's been moved and seconded that we approve the assignment of lease as presented. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passed. The next item is the Bobcat purchase.
Yeah, as the memo says, Rod has successfully sold all of our pieces of equipment, our surplus equipment. The Rod Hall used equipment lot is now
Yeah.
gone out of business. And he did get about $20,000 or $28,400 less $400 to sell on eBay. So we netted about $28,000 from the sale of that equipment, which was pretty good. We'd like to put that towards the purchase of a Bobcat. Rod has one picked out down at Hoven Equipment, an S570 for the government contract price of $29,920. That's a brand new Bobcat. We had been looking at some used Bobcats, but as we've discussed it, we think the value presented by this proposal for a new Bobcat is pretty good, and probably a piece of equipment that would probably last us 20 years given our usage. So we think there's a lot of value in buying this one since it is a good price. And as you can see below, we've replaced the functionality of almost all those pieces of equipment we've sold over the last few years. The one thing we haven't purchased is a smaller piece of excavating equipment that would replace the Bobcat that we used to borrow from Mang for a number of years until that agreement finally went away. So we have some implements already. We have a ramp hog for the Bobcat. We think it would be really useful in the snow for us in the areas underneath the terminal and out in front of the terminal. Then in the summertime, we'd be using that to put up signs and things like that. And so we'd like to we'd like to accept this proposal to buy this 570. As I said, the equipment's already sold. We do have the cash in hand, and we're really close to covering the full price with about a $1,000 shortfall. So Rod is looking for more things we can salvage, but primarily this would be financed just through the sale of existing equipment. So our proposal is to buy a new Bobcat for $29,920.
Yes,
So
and
moved.
I was operating under the assumption that we might have a conflict of interest, and it appears that we do, so let the record show that Director Oven removed himself from the discussion and the voting. So,
Now we can move.
Now we can move.
accept the proposal and the recommended action to buy the new S570 Bobcat for a very good price of $29,920. I wish we all had the opportunity to buy a Bobcat for that price.
I'm not sure that's all part of the motion. We can just stop with that.
Something
Yeah.
with government taxes.
Does anyone want to second that fine piece of?
I'll second
I'll second that, all right. I would just like to know if Rod would like to take some vehicles off of my hands in the Rod car lot, but that's a different discussion. Any comments, questions? Okay. we
The
have a
Bobcats that we were looking at used, I'll just mention, were around the $25,000 range, $26,000. So with this government price, it made a lot more sense just to spend a few more dollars for a new unit instead of.
And we've found the same thing with pickups the last few times we've looked. We've been thinking about buying used pickups, but by the time we look at what the state contract offers, we get a new pickup for around 20, 25. Even the 1-ton was only 26. It's just such a value proposition for a piece of equipment that it's hard to pass up those contracts. So.
Yeah, better to buy new.
And that takes care of the skid question we had last, so we were discussing at the work
Tractor.
session. The tractor thing that had to go on there, yeah, I remember that. Okay, well, we have a motion on the floor to accept the proposal and purchase the Bobcat as noted. It's been seconded. Hearing no other discussion, all those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. And on to the Arndt.
Can I come back, Casey?
You can come back.
On to the Arndt land lease. That's hard to
Well,
say.
Rod's been busy selling equipment, Laura's been busy selling land, so last month, as we mentioned, we were approached this summer by a landowner who borders kind of along his fence line, a long parcel that we own, about 2.5 acres, about 2.71 acres, that's next to our grazing easement. And whenever the grazing easement was fenced, this little piece was left out, and so it's kind of a stranded parcel between the parcel we lease for grazing and this private individual's land. And so he was interested in gaining access to that property. We told him, it makes sense for someone to gain access to it. I mean, there's nothing worse than, government property that's not generating good for anyone. And so we had proposed to him a 40-year lease for $1,000 a year. That would be indexed to inflation every 10 years. Every 10 years, we would make an adjustment to that for the inflation that has occurred over the last 10 years. That inflation rate we're proposing to cap at 7.5 over any 10-year period. And he's willing to move forward with this lease to gain access to that parcel. The lease would be conditioned that there can be no residential activity of any kind on that parcel. So there can't be any kind of living quarters, not even a camper on that property, because it would be in strict prohibition of FAA requirements when a parcel is bought for noise mitigation. But to the extent that he wants to have horses graze on there, or shop uses, those types of things, there's some value I think it presents for his property. I spoke to him early in the month, and I kind of told him, this is, with a 40-year term, I mean, it's something we would allow to be sold with his property. So we would take the successor of whoever owns that land as the lessee. It can be canceled at any time by him by simply not paying the rent. And so he can cancel it that way. We would have all of our normal aeronautical language in there that says that you can't erect any tall things without a 7460. It can't impede airplanes going over. There would be the notification that there is overflight. All the typical types of things that we have to do with our land. But I think it represents a good value for both of us. We begin generating a very small revenue stream off of a piece of property that otherwise wouldn't have any revenue stream. He gets the opportunity to do weed control and the things that concern him on that property, which there's value to the airport in having that done. And then he gains access to this adjacent 2.71 acres for his use as more or less part of his lot. So I think it's a great meeting of the minds between both him and us, and represents value for both organizations. So we'd recommend moving forward with that lease.
It's like the elusive win-win.
That's right. Occasionally they do happen.
They do happen. Okay, looking for a motion unless there's any preliminary comments or questions?
Sure, I'll move that we proceed forward and try to secure the lease.
Second?
I second it.
Okay. Okay.
I have comments.
I'm going to ask for
Oh,
now.
oh.
It's been moved and seconded that we proceed with the lease as outlined in the document, and John's put additional comments. Additional questions or comments? We have some. Wait,
No?
yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah, we have a motion on the floor, yeah.
Well, I have two problems with it. Number one, I think 4 years is too long. And number two, I think $1,000 is too high. But if the guy is gonna keep up the weeds, clean out the junk that's over there, and treat it as though it was his own private property, and he's willing to pay $1,000 a year for 2 acres,
You're getting out of the farming thing, you're getting out, aren't you?
well, it sounds like quite a deal. I mean, $1,000 for every 2 acres, let's see now. And it's only a lease.
He wants it.
Hmm?
He He wants it.
Yeah, he wants it.
Yeah.
Must want it pretty bad.
And as I had explained to him, I mean, it does, I mean, if you think about it as a residential property with a small lot, or, you know, I think he's less than an acre there, I mean, it does represent a value to that property going forward, that when he goes to sell that property, it is a very nice amenity. It's actually a very bucolic kind of area, there's a lot of raptors on that property. There's a creek that's split between us and him. It does, you know, I think, improve the value of that property. Laura really wants it. She's gonna make a counter offer by the time we're done.
Well, John, in light of his comments, though, what were the exit provisions from our standpoint?
If we need it for an aviation-related purpose, we can take it
At any time?
at any time.
And it's at about a 300-foot deficit to the airfield, so that is very unlikely, because he's down in the gully pretty far.
Yeah, I went over and looked, and it's useless to the airport,
Was it
quite
fenced?
honestly.
It's not, but the fence that comes in from the grading easement, he can easily tie into it. There's a fence in the front that goes to the ravine, and so it's really easy for him to pick it up on his fence line. And basically the entire thing can be fenced, you know, with just a couple hundred feet of fencing to tie into his fence. And that's one of the benefits to him doing it. If we ever tried to add it to the grazing easement, trying to get through there anywhere with a fence, you wouldn't be left with much land by the time we got a fence along the top of the gully.
Question? Call for the question.
We do have to act on this, right? I was trying to decide, do we have
We
to
could
act?
delay it.
No, but I mean, the board does have to act on it? Okay. Okay, we'll call the question then. If there are no other comments or questions, all those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same. Okay, it's passed.
Thank you.
I was trying to think with the $1,000 a year thing, if it was something we had to approve or you had the ability to do it.
It's still a use of the
Use of-
airport
okay.
property that, you know, so it's a,
Okay. Moving along then, and there's no other agenda items, correct? Yep, no other agenda items, so we'll move into the Airport Authority Board comments. Just go around the room here, starting with Commissioner. Bernie? Yep.
I have no comments, thank you. None.
All speechless today. Casey?
Well, I have one thing I'd like to bring up, and I don't know where to do it, so this is as good a place as any. The FAA, in their infinite wisdom, is trying, just as this whole government is, to take over. They're trying to come up with a policy for the use of private hangars and tell the people what they can do in their own private property, as it amounts to here. And this is a very dangerous precedent that they're trying to establish. Seems as how, number one, they don't own the airport. The city and the county owns the airport. Number two, they don't run the airport. The airport authority runs the airport. Number three, the airport authority leases land to private people to build hangars, businesses on. So number four, where in the hell does the FAA get off telling people that you're gonna do this and you're not gonna do that in your hangar on the airport? I just wanted to bring it to everybody's attention. This is a bad deal coming along.
if the board would like, I could fill in some of that a little bit. So there is existing policy today that is resident today, you know, and the FAA would say, we can do whatever we want with the airport as long as we don't want to accept federal grants. And so, you know, that's kind of their posture. That's where their hook is. You know, and so, you know, given that we get that $1.6 million a year in entitlements, plus we've averaged probably another $900,000 a year in discretionary, those are kind of the stakes, you know, that are out there. There is a policy today, though, and that is one thing that came up at the FAA meeting that Rod and I were at, that specific session. Today, you're not allowed to have residences on the airport. That's one of the things that they avoid, you know, in today's existing grant assurances. In addition to that, we're supposed to police the uses in the hangar today so that they're aviation related. And so like hangars that have campers, boats, those types of things, even if they're private hangars, they're not supposed to be there. And we do sign grant assurances even today that indicate that, the uses that are out there in those hangars are aviation related. They are trying to refine this even further, and there's sort of some good and some bad to it. The good to it is they're trying to make the airport sponsor the primary arbiter. And so, we would be the one that would determine what's what's an aviation use and what isn't. They're trying to clarify that, because today there's a lack of clarity. The FAA does occasionally do some hangar audits, and they come in and look, and I have heard of it happening before where, in Colorado Springs even, we had one hangar full of building materials, and the FAA did send us a letter and said, that's not an aviation use. Airport, you need to police that. But they are trying to make it such that the sponsor would be the determining authority of what's good and what isn't good, which I think would be better for us. But at the same time, they're also trying to narrow down and define what is acceptable and unacceptable as kind of an indication of the airport sponsor what we should accept and shouldn't. And I think in that discussion, they're doing it entirely too narrowly. Things like, for instance, if you have an airplane torn down for an extended period of time, that's not an aviation use. That doesn't make any sense. I mean, I've been to many big airports and many small airports that have more or less an aviation boneyard. We have an old frame sitting out there next to ABMAX's facilities that will probably never fly again. But where else are you going to keep a frame from a BAE 146? The thing is humongous. And so I think there does need to be some discussion, and I think it is appropriate for us to comment on that policy making when it comes out. For us to comment back that we think this is too narrowly focused. Those types of things, or whatever the board would agree, is a good set of comments.
Well, the part of it that everybody thinks is so stupid, there's a great many of home-built airplanes on this airport. Well, one of their prohibitions would be against building an airplane in your hangar. Well, sure, a lot of people build it in their basement, in their garage, but you've got to get it to the airport, put it together and build it, and like John said, when you've got stuff torn down for maintenance, repair, that's still an airplane. So it's stupid in typical government.
It'd be great if we could comment as a board when the time is appropriate, to send something in.
And I think what they told us is that's going to be submitted for comment, they thought relatively soon, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think probably next year.
Which may mean 2 years in FAA time, but at some point it will come out of FAA for comment, and I think that it would be entirely appropriate, because even the business of airports is different. Some airports, the space is so constrained, you don't want to have planes sitting around that aren't going to fly in the next 5 or 10 years, because someone would use that to access the airfield with a plane that would fly tomorrow. At the same time, other airports like us are kind of land rich, and we have room for people to build a hangar and work on their project airplane and fly it a few times and eventually get it certified, hopefully, or maybe even not, and take it apart and build a different one. That's still an aviation use, and we would have never gotten here if it weren't for places like Kitty Hawk and other places where people were flying stuff that wasn't airworthy. So I think there is good and bad there. I would like to be, the FAA to have less control over auditing us constantly and having to worry every time we have an inspector on the airfield what they might see in a cracked hangar door. Most inspectors aren't that litigious about going through hangars, but occasionally you do get one that wants to look in some hangars. And so it'd be great if that pressure was gone. And at the same time, I think we should comment on these other things that are probably overreaching, as JC said.
Anything else, Jason? Anything else?
Well, that was enough.
Is this the general thing that's happening across the country, or just here?
It's FAA rulemaking. Yeah, it's a national policy.
One size fits all.
Yep.
Okay, I do have a comment I want to share. I actually shared it with John already, but It was, number one, something nice, which you like to hear from time to time, and secondly, it kind of ties into the discussion we had at the last meeting about the image of the airport. I was able to participate in a conference here in Great Falls last week where many of the presenters came from Detroit and Atlanta, and consequently, a number of them had never been to Great Falls, certainly, and perhaps not even Montana before. And I didn't actually get to speak to the particular gentleman, but it was relayed to me at breakfast one morning when we were all sitting around talking. And of course, we had the extraordinary weather week last week, so everybody was chatting about the weather. And the comment was made that these guys fly all the time and they've been everywhere. And this particular guy said when he got off the plane, as he was walking through the airport, he never felt more compelled to go fishing in his entire life. And he unfortunately hadn't planned any extra time in his trip and didn't have his fishing rod and those kinds of things. But I thought that was a very nice comment and, you know, something to pass along and show that somehow the idea about the outdoors is getting through. That was nice.
Yeah, and just to second that, I met a group in the airport on Thursday or Friday last week that was in from Seattle and Oregon. It was a mixed group that came in on Alaska, but they were all friends who were coming up here to fish for the first time. They typically do an annual trip down in Yellowstone. They fish down there on the Yellowstone somewhere, and this was their first time up in Missouri. So it was great to hear that we're attracting some new folks here, and hopefully they'll go home and tell their friends what a good time they had. They were staying down in Craig, and so we gave them some recommendations of restaurants and brew houses and other trouble they could get into while they were in town. So you know, that was great to see too. So yeah, I think this is particularly shoulder seasons in the spring and fall are great times for us to begin to build up those tourism seasons for the fishing, and that's something we've got to increasingly get articulate in so that we can bring more people out here for those. It's a great time of year in Montana. The weather's usually good. It's a great time to show off the state. And it's a new business, I think, over the last 10 or 15 years that we begin to attract in, where we have a strategic advantage over a lot of destinations. And so we see that as a great opportunity, that fishing audience. So hopefully we can continue to build on that.
Commissioner Talcott.
No comments, except for apologize for being late, and thanks for covering for me.
Got you covered. We would invite some public comment now. Is there anyone who wishes to make public comment?
I'd just like to thank JC for bringing that to the attention of the board, the FAA, who it's important for everybody to know about that. And then I would also caution JC to be careful and not commit the heinous crime of taking a picture in the national forest.
Oh.
Yeah.
From my airplane.
Speaking of an overreaching government.
Yeah. There's a little jeopardy, FAA and the Forest Service, yeah.
That's why I always fly around.
Oh my, any other public comments? Any other public comments? Yeah.
Just to add to JC's comments, what the FAA is really trying to do is get fair market value for airports, airport authorities, hangars for their use of land. But they've also kind of come to the conclusion that they've got a bigger problem than they actually have. So they're reaching, like JC said, they're trying to figure out and exclude other types of activities in hangars. You know, there are people out there that abuse the system, have a camper and a boat and an old antique car or something in their hangar with no aircraft use, and they're getting that land for pennies on the dollar. If you go down to Three Forks and go to their hangars on that general aviation, most of them have a house inside of them. So you can see how the FAA is trying to limit that unfair market value use of their airport grounds. But again, they're adding things to it.
And that's a tough.
Towns in the dwell.
Yeah, and that's the tough part, is one rule can't fit all situations. I mean, you know, there are airports even in this state where there's not enough room for people that have an airplane to develop something and have their airplane at the airport, and that's unfortunate. It shouldn't be that way when other people are using their hangar for campers and other things. And so, you know, and that's the difficulty. I mean, I think it is incumbent upon the airport authorities broadly, whether it be a city or a county or us, to police their airfield and ensure that there is access for people that are trying to do aviation. And folks that aren't doing aviation aren't just sitting on land that would otherwise be used by someone.
Yeah, how can you balance the value of working on your airport or storing a couple of bales of pot in your hangar? I mean, it's really hard to differentiate. You know, what's the greater, yeah, you gotta look at the income approach, that's what you got.
If you're gonna use your plane to fly it, you're gonna have to.
I'm not sure I'm going to like being the chair of record for this meeting. If there are no other public comments, I guess I should ask staff any additional comments?
The only thing I'd notice, Laura's going
Good.
to a meeting to help I-State out with some permitting issues that have come up, so I asked her to cover for us at that meeting at 2:30 with the city, so that's why she's gone. So.
Okay, with no further business to come before the board, I declare this meeting adjourned, and may we take maybe a 5-minute break?
Sure.
And then move into the work session. So, let me hand these out to everybody. The exhibit A's.
Oh, yeah, we should probably pass those around since it looks like we do have forms.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, now I remember Exhibit A.
Old exhibit A. It's referred to in the bylaws somewhere at the beginning, on the role of the board or something like that.
Yeah.